there might be potential to unite folks who are more left-leaning and folks who tend to be more right-leaning or conservative, because you have the environmental side of it, which is, this is, as you said, going to drain aquifers, going to drain lakes, it's going to do a lot of damage. And then, of course, that conservation is one area, despite what some people believe. We don't have to talk about climate change and get into that whole thing, which is something I question completely. But you can just talk about the environment, you can talk about permaculture, you can talk about conservation, and you can bring together left and right, because people of all stripes care if their local beautiful lakes and streams get dried up and taken over by some data center they never asked for, because we're being told we're in the race to 6G and we're in the race to AI and we got to do it before China does it. And none of us were ever asked about this. This is just another area where I find it astounding that it's like this given that we must keep going forward. Progress at all costs. None of us were ever asked, like, do you want faster movie downloads? Do you think you need more data? Do you think you need all this stuff? No, it's just being assumed that we want a world where AI is ubiquitous. And in order to power that AI, of course, we need these massive data centers, which need massive amounts of water, as you were talking about, in order to cool the servers to run the AI. So it all is kind of interconnected to this technocracy that I'm speaking about.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Awesome. Derrick, welcome to Dr. Ben Tapper's podcast. I'm excited to have you and sitting down with you. So how you been, brother?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. It feels like it's been a long time coming for us to connect. I know we have a lot of mutual friends.
Yeah. I've seen that. I feel like you're a brother from another mother, but I wanted to sit down with you because I listened to you in a debate here recently, and I gained a lot of respect for you, and I just want to have a conversation with you in the days ahead. I think you brought a lot of wisdom in the debate, and I want to have a conversation around this because it's not a fun topic to be diving into about just the tyranny that we're in and the wars at hand here. And I feel like America, like we're just getting into a real stink hole, and we're going to see blowback from this. And not too many people have the courage to speak out on these topics. So I want to dive into that and just kind of get your thoughts on this and have these conversations. So first, how did you get into these topics?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me on, Ben. I've been doing activism, independent journalism for going on 16 years now this year, just about. Yeah. I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and I started to wake up politically in late 2009, 2010. At that time, there's Ron Paul's second presidential campaign was kind of coming into being. I discovered his work after hearing him speak at the University of Houston. I was reading some conspiracy authors like Jim Marrs, a book called Rule by Secrecy. I found a documentary from Alex Jones. That was kind of in the early days, and that really immediately inspired me to not only question what was going on in the world and question the systems around us and start learning about the philosophy of liberty, but very quickly I was determined to do something about it. It felt like it wasn't enough to just post on Facebook or, go out and protest, which, I was doing those things, and Occupy movement came about shortly after that. And I wasn't totally aligned with the movement, but I was definitely, concerned about the direction things were going. And I started an activist group called the Houston Freethinkers. And from 2010 to 2017, that was my life, doing monthly actions, doing community garden work, doing outreach of all kinds, printing out DVDs and flyers, going and passing them out, confronting politicians, and having a community activist house where we would host concerts. We would just basically became a community space for people to talk about these ideas and think about them. And then a couple of years into that, I started to see that the local media, as well as obviously the national media, weren't really doing their jobs. We had an event, it was a fundraiser from the Houston Freethinkers, where somebody called the police for a noise complaint, and the cops showed up about 10 cars deep. They pulled out a shotgun on me and 100 unarmed people. They arrested me, claimed that I had disobeyed some orders. And then the next day, the local media came and interviewed me. They were all friendly to my face. But that evening, all the news reports said, local group of conspiracy theorists surrounded the Houston police. And it didn't take me long to realize, like, okay, they're not really interested in the truth. And I just started picking up a camera, started going to the mayor's press conferences, going to the police chief's press conferences, and pretty quickly realized that this is something I had a knack for and that I really enjoyed. I didn't go to school for journalism. I've since taken journalism courses, but it was more just a desire of like, okay, activism is one side, but if I'm going to try to pursue the truth, maybe I should be out there asking hard questions as well. And so that has kind of taken over my life. And since then, I've written some books. I do a lot of public speaking. I've produced numerous documentaries. My main website is theconsciousresistance.com, where I explore spirituality, so-called conspiracies, investigative journalism, do podcasts and interviews, and I organize events. The People's Reset's an annual event I host in Mexico, completely focused on solutions. And I also make conscious hip hop. So, all of my actions and efforts are pretty much aimed in the same direction. How can I empower myself, empower other people, question the narratives being fed to us, and try to encourage other people to do the same? And one other thing I'll just add to that briefly. Everything I just described was kind of my political awakening that started in 2009, 2010. But my work, and the reason I call it the Conscious Resistance, and I discuss everything from spirituality to government and corporate corruption. The reason I try to bring those things together is because I really feel like my first real awakening happened 20 years ago, actually, 2005. I was 20 years old, and I'd been right out of high school, went into college. I got hooked in drinking and abusing and using drugs. I got hooked on crystal meth, and then I went to prison at 20 years old in November 2005. So I actually just passed the 20th anniversary of that. And it was really that experience of getting locked up and getting forced to kind of face myself and be alone with myself, where I started to kind of open up more spiritually and got into meditation and got into prayer and started doing a lot of healing and working on my own personal trauma. So that journey kind of started and beforehand. Yeah. And then when I got out of prison, that's when I, was sort of looking at the world with a fresh set of eyes, and having been a part of the drug war and starting to question the drug war narratives. And that eventually, as I said, led me to Ron Paul and these other kinds of things. But I feel like those two things combined to sort of set my path before me.
Dude, awesome. Are you a Christian?
I'm not a Christian. I grew up in a Christian family, and I guess you could say in my own way. I don't go to church actively, but as I said, I grew up in a Christian family. My mother is a daily Bible reader, and I do believe in the Creator of this world, this existence.
So would you say you believe in Jesus?
That's still an ongoing debate for me. And it's interesting you're asking about this, because it's been a discussion that's been ongoing with myself and some friends. Because the other part of my spiritual path, I was grateful to have a huge spiritual influence in my grandmother, she's recently deceased, but was a Christian. And I think you could probably say she was kind of an esoteric Christian, in the sense that she believed in Jesus Christ as a living being and as the Savior, but also was very open to like Rudolf Steiner and some other kind of more, mystical kind of interpretations of Christianity. And it was her, when I got locked up, it was her that started sending me books on prayer, Christian prayer. I don't know if you're familiar with Father Thomas Keating, but he's since deceased as well, but he had this type of prayer that he called centering prayer, which was almost like a form of Christian meditation. So my grandma was sending me books on that. She was sending me books on Zen Buddhism, and just kind of opening me up in ways that I hadn't previously been, because when I was going through my trauma, I definitely was very much anti-God, anti-anything, like spiritual. And it took kind of for me to hit my rock bottom to start opening up in those ways. And so my mind has opened up in ways that it hasn't been in the past, but also as I got on my activism path, and I also started to explore some of my own heritage. My family is native Seminole on my grandmother's side, and then native to Texas on my mother's side. And so I started going to, Sweat Lodge and Sundance and other ceremony, and kind of opening up to, the idea of a creator at all in general. So it's still a journey of exploration for me. But, in terms of who Christ is said to have been, I definitely, align with the message, of course. And in fact, in my first book, The Conscious Resistance, it's a trilogy. I talk about how Christ was essentially, a rebel against the government, and was not telling people to follow blindly and listen to the edicts of government or even of church, but, to follow God. And that's something I definitely align with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a Christian. I believe Christ is the Savior, and I believe, I believe He is God. 100% man and 100% God. He came here to die for us and rose again. And I believe he's the only way to heaven. But I think, it's, and we have a very similar story because I was very much, I was 20 years old and I was actually 19. I got thrown from a truck at 80 miles an hour, broke my back, and I was drinking all the time, partying all the time. I was living for myself. And I just, I had a crazy experience where I knew God saved my life, but I was like, I'm still going to drink and party and do all these things. And I remember one time I was on the couch and I was completely sore. I just got back from class. I'm sitting on the couch and all of a sudden the lady on the television said, "You're going to be thrown into a lake of fire." And dude, next thing I know, I couldn't move my body. And all of a sudden, boop, I'm standing in front of this lake of fire. I couldn't move. I was terrified. I've never been so scared in my life. And I'm like, oh, I couldn't talk. I couldn't breathe. And I just was sitting there in front of this lake that was like roaring. And it had like this encapsulated souls. And it was like this volcanic rock as far as I can see. And I can't believe I'm sharing this on my podcast. People are like, people are going to listen like, this guy's a loon. And I'm sitting there, but this really happened. And I was just like, oh, I just got to get the word Jesus out. And I just like, and I said, Jesus. And all of a sudden, boom, I'm back on my couch. And I jumped up like, what the fohize was that, dude? And it was the scariest thing I've ever said. I'm like, oh, and I'm just like, okay, I'm listening. And then I feel like ever since then, like God's like, dude, take me seriously. And the Bible says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And for me, that's like, okay, life's an Etch-a-Sketch. We can draw the craziest picture. You can do meth, you can do whatever, be in prison, do whatever these things. But it's like, once you turn to God, he's like, his mercies are new each day. It's like, the 1980s Game Boy, the Etch-a-Sketch, draw the crazy picture, shake it up, start all over. And that's the beauty of the gospel. But dude, I want to talk
Thanks
about Ron
for sharing
Paul.
that, brother.
Yes. And I love that you're a Ron Paul fan, because like Ron Paul people are my people, because like I'm going to plug my shameful podcast post, but Ron Paul episode 2, we've done a couple episodes together. Ron Paul had a huge impact on my life. And I feel like he was the modern day Thomas Jefferson of our time, but he woke me up on the Federal Reserve, and I campaigned for him on his trail, and I was a delegate for Ron Paul. He woke me up on the swine flu scare, and it was a lot of fun. I got to meet him a few times, and I consider him a friend now. So it's been a lot of fun, but I want to talk to you because you got so much to talk about, and there's a lot of wisdom. And I think what I really wanted to bring you on to talk about how a lot of these struggles that we're in and the wars that we're facing right now they're just not constitutional, and people they just get behind this because like Trump is in office, and it's like, yes, like, yeah, I'm a patriot, and that doesn't mean you have to love the president. That doesn't mean you have to love the government. That means you love the people, love this country, and love the people. And and I firmly believe that I know you're in Mexico, you can still have an opinion. And so I think it's important that we talk about that and welcome that, because if we just say, oh, your opinion doesn't matter because you're in a different country, it's like, no, you still care about the people here. You still care about this country. It's like you want peace.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to have these conversations.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a leader in the emerging wellness paradigm taking shape across North America and beyond. People everywhere are recognizing that the old sick care model, quick fixes, symptom chasing, and surface level solutions simply isn't enough. Ezra Healing is a part of the shift toward truly patient-centered care that prioritizes well-being, integrity, and a do-no-harm approach. At Ezra Healing, your whole lifestyle, rhythms, and patterns are considered to better support the interconnected systems of your body. They're focused on real solutions, long-term health promotion, and prevention, an evolving grassroots movement dedicated to helping individuals and families live healthier and more resilient lives. If you're ready for a wellness experience that puts humanity first, Ezra Healing is guiding the way. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the word patriot. I've done a video maybe years ago about this question because I've had people in my audience occasionally say, well, do you consider yourself a patriot? And it's a word that I don't really wholly feel aligned with, but largely because of the way I think it's been kind of co-opted and changed to what you were pointing to there, is that where people think being a patriot means just being blindly loyal to whoever's in office or unquestioning of the government. Now, in terms of being a patriot to the land or to the people of a place, I think that's definitely something I can I can get behind. And I think it's unfortunate that, Trump's not the first president to have what I consider to be sort of a cult of personality around him. Obviously, Obama had a huge one as well, and Biden to a much lesser degree. That was more about people just hating Trump. But it is definitely, in my analysis, as I said, I've been doing this 16 years, so I'm still fairly fresh into this as far as I'm concerned. But when I look at my path of the last 16 years, and even prior to that, as I mentioned in this debate with Naomi Wolf on Iran, when she asked if I was somebody who voted. I voted when I was 18 years old. I was fresh out of college. The Iraq war was starting then. Bush is dropping bombs. It was very much anti-Bush. But I was still kind of in that left-right paradigm. And so I voted. The only time I've ever voted in my life was for John Kerry, because I thought, well, that must be, if this guy's not the answer, then obviously the other side is the answer, because they claim they're going to be the opposite. And it didn't take me long to really see, okay, that's a false paradigm, the left-right paradigm. It's what keeps people trapped in and playing the game. And so watching people fall for Obama and his well-spoken constitutional lawyer, this and that, and then
who was taking Ron Paul talking points. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, absolutely.
He was taking Ron Paul talking points. Let's put that in there. Okay.
No, and you're right, because in 2008, when Ron Paul was first running, and in 2012, he was saying all the right things. And once it became clear after the first term, at least for many of us, that Obama wasn't who he said he was, Ron Paul was again there to be a sort of contrast to that. Watching people fall for that, and then whether it's 8 years of Bush and then 8 years Obama, and then Trump coming in and pretending to be, or in my view, pretending to be a wrecking ball and going to do something completely different. Of course, there's a lot of competing theories or ideas of whether Trump has been co-opted or this is, who knows, setting all that aside. All I know is that it doesn't appear that any of the candidates and anybody who is actually allowed to rise to that level of being in the White House is actually about the message of liberty, is actually about the Constitution. Sure, left and right love to bring up the Constitution whenever it fits their narrative, or when they can use it as a way to kind of bludgeon their opponents and say, oh, they're not sticking to the Constitution. Like right now, the Democrats and sort of the left-leaning progressives, they will bring up the Constitution quite a bit in order to, rightfully so, call out Trump for things he's doing. But as we know, during COVID, they couldn't care less about the Constitution. And it's just unfortunate that it seems like that's kind of the status quo right now that Americans are shown. And of course, there's third parties, there's things like that, but we know that they don't really have the ability to overcome this machine. And a lot of my work over the years, particularly one of my recent books, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, I've been focused for years on digital privacy, digital rights, and the growth of this technocratic state, where you get people like Peter Thiel and David Ellison, Larry Ellison, and Alex Karp, folks at Palantir, and these other folks that Trump is working directly with, that are also the new military-industrial complex contractors, how those are the folks that are really running the machine. And it seems like left and right, Democrats, Republicans sure seem to agree on that. They agree on surveillance, they agree on war, they agree on Zionism, and I think it's a sad state of affairs.
Can your home house 5 kids and me and my wife?
We're working on it. We're building a community out here. We're preparing for what may come.
Seriously. Probably wise there, Derrick, to get out of the country. You know what I mean? It's like, I remember I made national news the second day Trump was in office on his second term, because he had this Larry Ellison dude. And they're like, we're going to put $500 billion in this AI government surveillance system. And I'm like, and the mRNA technology, I'm like, what? I said, get me off the planet. I don't, and seriously. And then next thing you know, can we call it a tweet? What do you call it? I don't know, but it like went viral. And it's just like, seriously, I want to downsize the government. I want to go back to like the 80s here, just without when phones had leashes and we had more privacy.
Seems like there was a sweet spot in there, the 90s, early 2000s, where you had internet, you had technology, but it wasn't all encompassing, interacting with every part of our life. There was a sweet spot there. I'm still sure of it. I don't know if we'll ever get back there, but it seemed like that was the golden era, if you will.
Yes, I feel like that song, that Pink Floyd song, it's like, welcome to the machine. You know that song? I'm not doing it justice. I'm not David Gilmour, but it's, you know what I mean? But it's like that. I feel like that's the era that we're in with this AI survey. It is scary. What did we learn during Crony Baloney is that, more government is bad, right? I don't care. It's like more government, bigger government is not a good thing. And, it's like this contrast that for every, it's like Newton's third law. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. It's like, do you want freedom? Then that means less government. You want more government? That means less freedom, more regulation. And that's where we're at. It's like a teeter. And it's like, what do you choose? And so our government is just growing out of control. And especially if we're investing and dumping $500 billion of taxpayer money, people listening, that's your money, my money going into the system that I don't want. And trust me, you don't want it. Not only that, I posted a thing on X and on Instagram, and I'm getting a ton of flack. Like, go back, like our educational system failed us. Look at and I think it did. But it's like, you have this, they're making fun of me because I said, these data centers are going to be using 5 million gallons of water a day. And I said, is that going to strain our farmers' irrigation system? Is that going to, dry up our aquifers? And the people like, well, farmers use more water. I'm like, well, that's my point exactly. Thank you.
I think that's a real concern. I mean, you point, that's actually one issue. I've been thinking about this recently. I've got a friend who's really trying to focus on the data centers aspects, and they're building actually a digital map to show people just all the locations that are being built in the US, which is pretty astonishing when you see it like that on a map. And I think this is one area where there might be potential to unite folks who are more left-leaning and folks who tend to be more right-leaning or conservative, because you have the environmental side of it, which is, this is, as you said, going to drain aquifers, going to drain lakes. It's going to do a lot of damage. And then, of course, that conservation is one area, despite what some people believe. We don't have to talk about climate change and get into that whole thing, which is something I question completely. But you can just talk about the environment. You can talk about permaculture. You can talk about conservation, and you can bring together left and right, because people of all stripes care if their local beautiful lakes and streams get dried up and taken over by some data center they never asked for, because we're being told we're in the race to 6G and we're in the race to AI and we got to do it before China does it. And none of us were ever asked about this. I mean, this is just another area where I find it astounding that it's like this given that we must keep going forward. Progress at all costs. None of us were ever asked, like, do you want faster movie downloads? Do you think you need more data? Do you think you need all this stuff? No, it's just being assumed that we want a world where AI is ubiquitous. And in order to power that AI, of course, we need these massive data centers, which need massive amounts of water, as you were talking about, in order to cool the servers, to run the AI. So it all is kind of interconnected to this technocracy that I'm speaking about, and that Trump is definitely doing a great job accelerating. And it's not that Trump is the only one, or he is the Antichrist. I mean, I guess that question remains to be seen. We'll see how the years play out. But I think ultimately the way I view it is that I tend to explain it like the baton of tyranny gets passed back and forth, right? So many of the things Trump is doing that we're seeing, whether it's about the war or the surveillance state, he is just picking up things that were left in place by Biden and then Trump before him and Obama before him and Bush before him. Like the same justification, just as one example, that Trump was using to bomb Venezuelan boats or to launch a war without constitutional congressional approval. Well, he's using the same precedents that have been established by Obama, Bush, Clinton, et cetera, before him. And so it goes back and forth from left and right. So it's not even so much that it's Trump, the ultimate evil, the ultimate bad guy. He's just the current person there. I do think he is unique in the sense that he seems to have fooled quite a bit of people into thinking by supporting him, they were, fighting the resistance and defeating the deep state. I think that's what makes it unique. But ultimately, he's still just another figurehead that can and will be replaced, as far as we know, unless he does try to stay in office, as he's joked about. But if he just goes, on like most presidents have, there will be another president, and that new president will use the same powers that Trump put into place to do other things. And so it just keeps advancing down the field while they keep us fighting over left and right. But as I said, I do think that there's opportunity with the AI issue, and particularly with the way it's going to affect the environment with these data centers. There's some potential to try to bring people together. And as much as I enjoy in my my angrier or weaker moments on Twitter and elsewhere, just talking crap to people who just can't seem to get it, ultimately my goal really is to try to bring people together. Like that's what I know in my heart of hearts is what is needed right now more than ever.
Yeah. Well, I think it's easy to get in that trap. Like, oh, I'm always doom and gloom. All my posts and stuff are negative. I'm like, oh, I need to zoom out a little bit and see kind of how and do some self-reflection on what I'm posting. Because yeah, it is negative, but sometimes. But again, our heart is for people to obviously come together. I mean, in order for us to change, we have to talk about the problems. In order to provide solutions, we have to focus on the problems.
Exactly.
And that's what we're doing. We're trying to shine light on the darkness. It's not like we're pushing dark. We're pushing light. It just seems like it's dark because we're exposing the darkness.
Like you said, you have to be, if you're going to ever address the problem, then you have to be able to look at if you're ever going to address the solution, you have to see the problem. And in fact, that's been one of my big issues with spirituality, whether you're speaking more kind of generally or even, from a religious perspective, is people who take this perspective of putting their head in the sand, right? So don't talk about the bad things because, I just don't want to hear about it. I'll make a joke sometime in some of my presentations that when I first started getting into spirituality and I was in activism, I was kind of living this dual life where I had my activist friends and we would go out and talk about, all the scary things and try to reach people and organize events and stuff like that. And then I had my spiritual friends and we would, talk about spirituality or do a meditation or a prayer group or something like that. And they were just separate worlds because it seemed like at this time, at least the early 2010s, my activist friends didn't really have any interest in spirituality for whatever reason. A lot of the libertarians I knew, particularly, they were mainly atheists, kind of logical, rational people. They didn't want to hear about anything beyond the five senses. And then I would talk to my more spiritual, conscious friends and I would say, hey guys, do you hear about this latest police shooting or this latest thing the government's doing? And they'd say, only good vibes here. Don't talk about it. You're going to manifest bad things.
Vibes.
It was like put your head in the sand type of spirituality. And that really informed the way that I try to do things, that I think that you can be a spiritual, conscious, whatever person and still address the negative things. Because as you were saying, we're not going to get to a place of, well, what do we do about these things if we refuse to even look at them and just put our heads in the sand?
Right, dude. I mean, we're not here to be complacent in the face of evil. I mean, evil is abound. Tyranny is abound. And if
I want to ask you something real quick, brother, if you don't mind, because actually, you brought up your Christian beliefs, and again, I don't necessarily, I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but I grew up in a Christian home. My mother is very, very devout, and it's it's a big part of my life through family and friends. And I actually posted on social media last night, and I'd love to get your take on this. That one of my problems with a particularly not just Christian, but I think it shows up in other religions, but a religious analysis of our current predicament as a species is that for some people, their view is that, well, all we need to do is just accept Jesus into our hearts and then wait, and then Jesus will be here and all it, and which to me is kind of another version of the whole QAnon phenomenon, trust the plan. And I have some Christian friends who said, no, look at these verses, Christ is saying, stand up and follow me and stand up against evil. And I'm just curious, like, if that's a perspective you see kind of in your Christian circles, where some people, because I'll get comments occasionally and people were like commenting to whatever bad thing I'm reporting on. And they'll say, well, Derrick, we just need to accept Jesus into our hearts, accept Christ as your savior. And for them, that kind of seems to be the end of the story.
That's it. So that there is a giant lie, that there is deception, because it's like, oh, say this prayer and you'll be saved. Rub the lamp and your wish will be granted. Right? Like, no, that's, I don't like religion. This is a relationship. This is why I look at, some of these, I've done the deep dive on some of these biblical translations, like the ESV, the NLT, a lot of these, like the King James or the New King James, Matthew 18:11 is not taken out of those passages. And, but in that passage, it said Jesus came to restore that which was lost, and like to paint this picture of understanding who we are. We are holy and blameless, and we are God's. Like, we are here, designed, created to have a relationship with the Creator through Christ, and Christ came as the mediator. This is, the Bible says, He's the mediator. He's the Redeemer, the bread of life. He is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He is there to redeem us, to have a relationship with Him, that we can come to Him boldly to the throne of God through Christ. Religion, man-made, has like perverted this whole thing, and I don't like religion.
I agree with that.
And this is relationships, like, just saying that prayer, like, that's to me like, nope, that's not accurate. You need to pick up your cross daily. And like, this isn't like a cruise ship. Once you pick up that cross, like, everything's gonna be hunky-dory. I'm in Job. Job suffered, but he still praised God. Like, dude, God, you take everything, but you're still worthy to be praised. Why? Because you're the Almighty. And like, we are here to have suffering and have joy. And in my testimony, it's like, dude, I went through some of the worst of the worst of the worst because I had President Biden call me out on national television. I made a lot of people mad. Biden said, I was killing people. And, and it's like, when that happens, dude, man, yes, I was persecuted. But I found joy. Like, I would pluck my banjo and sing to the Lord. And like, I found this praise, like, oh, I found a happy place. And I understand what scripture means when it says the joy of the Lord is my strength. I found this supernatural peace that supersedes all understanding, and this joy of when I just worshiped. And I'm like, dude, God like uprooted all my belief systems during COVID, like with the church. And I've read this book called Letters to the Church by Francis Chan. And I was like, it like revamped some things. But to me, it's a relationship. We need to go and understand that we are going to suffer for righteousness' sake, but blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And then, I looked at all the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. And I just got a guy that brought me a book here because I was doing this deep dive on all the prophecies. And it's like, dude, Jesus didn't just fulfill some, he fulfilled all of them. And it just baffles my brain. And so to me, it's like, wow, it gives me a whole nother perspective. Not only that, like, I'm sorry, I'm going on all these, I'm kind of rambling on, but
You're fine.
Like even the Nephilim and the history of the Nephilim and the burial mounds, man, my mind is blown with all of this stuff, and I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, it's just it's something that I get more and more curious about because obviously not like what you were describing, having a relationship. That's kind of what I would consider my mom to be. Like, she doesn't go to a church and hang on every word of some particular pastor or thing like that. She sits and reads her Bible every night and kind of takes her own notes and has her own conversation and ongoing dialogue and relationship with God, with Christ. And that I have a lot of respect for, even if I don't necessarily share every single one of her beliefs. I've learned to respect it, and we can dialogue and talk about God in our own ways and find that common ground. I guess that's kind of what I've always had an issue with and what I've reported on in some of my work. And particularly, I have a 17-part documentary series called The Pyramid of Power. And I have an episode about religion and about the secret societies and how a lot of these people who in front of the cameras proclaim to be Christian or whatever else they may be, behind the scenes, they're at the Bohemian Grove, they're doing, whatever else. Yes. And they're using religion as a tool for domination, for control, for manipulation. Yep. And you see, I would see it occasionally on, I think John Hagee is probably one of the most well-known for pastors for trying to use his, what I would consider a twisted interpretation of the Bible to justify things we were seeing in Gaza, to justify war with Iran, to almost like they're desperate to try to bring scripture to life in their own twisted way, to bring prophecy. And then they use that. And of course, Trump has played right along with that to try to get people to say, look, you need to follow Israel regardless. This is what God said, and that's where I see it being very dangerous.
Dude, so I'm going to tell you something. I had a gentleman come to me during the pandemic and claim, "Oh, I'm a new Christian," and then I posted a picture with him, and I was working with Bobby Kennedy at the time in the lawsuit, and he was representing us as an attorney, and it was crazy because I'm with my wife and children, and we got asked to speak at the LA mandates, and then Bobby Kennedy was there, and I was like, "Oh, you're Bobby Kennedy," and he knew who I was because I was on the disinformation dozen list with him, and he asked me to be a plaintiff in his lawsuit. And then this guy I was with an event told me, oh, he's a new Christian and wanted to be friends. And he came to the area and he wanted to talk and have lunch. And I posted a picture on social media with him. And then someone from Bobby Kennedy's staff said, how do you know that gentleman? And I said, I met him at a freedom rally. He goes, you need to stay away. And they sent me this like confidential folder of like how he is this like top CIA and has like, these dark ties to the Monsanto lawsuit that they were fighting. And I was like, whoa. And I just didn't know. I'm like, wow, this seems so far-fetched to me. But, but in the article, they say that they use like, they say that they're Christians, or they'll say to try to manipulate and to get your trust, to earn your trust and to try to get in. And I see that, dude. I see it. But this is where I go back to, I think God's heart for church it needs to be revamped, because we homeschool our children, and we have 5 kids. And, the church is set up today to like, everyone wants to listen to Moses. And it's like, God is calling us to be like Moses. Everybody wants to, like the public school setting, the churches are set up like public school. You listen to the pastor on Sunday, you sit in the altars, and then you go home. Sunday, you're a saint. Monday, you ain't. Right? And it's like, to me, and it's just completely backwards on how God wants to do things. And then, you got worship and all these, it's like, it's all just like a concert. And I think worship is so intimate. I pluck the banjo and I sing my heart out all the time in my free time. It's my favorite pastime. And it's such an intimate thing for me. And it literally got me through the hardest of times. But again, I think the way church is set up is not, and I have my whole issues with the Catholic Church, dude. That, like, the pedophilia symbols and everything on there, like, what is that about? And it's just dark ties, and all secrets lead to Rome. Oh, shout out to Stephen Quayle there. But it's like, it's corrupt. There's so much corruption around it, and perverted. And I think that's what the enemy wants. Satan wants to pervert and try to manipulate and deceive and confuse. And we have a God that's not a God of confusion. But I'm rambling on. But Derrick, I think your mom is on to something, and I want to encourage you. That having that relationship is so important. I know you're very wise, and I think I just encourage you to keep seeking Christ. And it's one of those things where, for me, it's been very transformational and restorative. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And in Matthew, it says, because we all carry burden, and knowing this, especially knowledge, the more knowledge we obtain, the more burdensome it can become. And I've had this conversation this morning just with the AI. And I feel like this is a prophecy that's being fulfilled. Like in Daniel, it talks about like knowledge will be everywhere, or expanding knowledge. And we're seeing that in AI, right? So is this a prophecy that's being fulfilled with AI? And when knowledge increases, wisdom decreases, right? And so I think wisdom, as it says in James, God will give it to us liberally when we ask for it. It's going to be an interesting time. Like, wisdom will be a precious commodity.
There's definitely no lack of interesting times right now. Yeah. And I mean, again, even without me holding those beliefs tightly myself, I can clearly see how there are people who do want to bring about prophecy. And yeah, of course, I pause and I find myself looking at things like digital IDs and, digital currency that they want to track and trace, and AI and the role that it's playing, and people like Peter Thiel seeming to have an obsession with the Antichrist. And, I'm definitely keeping an eye on these things, because I do think, like you said, wisdom being short in supply, knowledge being everywhere. I definitely think AI is, it's a tool, of course, like many tools humanity has had, but I do think it's a unique one in the way that, we're already finding, I've found some studies in the last week or two, we're already finding with these AI chatbots that it's already starting to make people dumber, just the same way that Google has and internet has, because we become more increasingly reliant on them. And one of the studies I was looking at was showing how just with a few, like maybe a month's of use, and this is for people who are using it pretty regularly, not just maybe asking a question periodically, but if you're using it like a lot of the younger generation are on a daily basis, or even the younger generation, those who feel very lonely, these chatbots become like their friends, and or at least they believe so in many ways. Dude. And they start to develop what they consider a real relationship, and they dialogue and they go back and forth. Well, these chatbots are learning more and more about humanity, learning about our emotional state of mind, learning about who we are, of course, because people are giving so much data, but also the more dependent and reliant we become on them, it's like your brain and those certain parts of your brain that require cognitive function, they're starting to atrophy, because we're becoming just more reliant. Well, I don't need to think about those things anymore, because I can just ask the chatbot. I think that obviously we're not the first ones to talk about this, but I think it's a realistic concern for where things are headed. And for me, I'm striving to be as human as possible and stay as human as possible in the face of all that we see right now, because I think that to me is one of the keys. I want to go outside. I want to build with my hands. I want to, actually
dirty.
Be in nature, get my hands and feet in soil, and try to get as often as possible. I don't have any children yet myself, but I have 6 nieces and nephews, and the oldest 2 are definitely at that point where, if allowed and if not encouraged to get out from behind the phones, they will just sit there for hours and hours. But I also see how there is still that human spirit in them, that when Uncle Derrick comes and says, hey, let's go on a bike ride, let's go on a walk, let's go to the park, they jump up, they're ready for it, they want to go out, they want to interact with each other. And so I think it's important for all of us to do what we can to not only be positive influences on the younger generations and those coming after us, but to just do what we can to remain human in the face of everything we're seeing.
Amen, brother. We live in the woods, out in 10 acres, and we homeschool, and this is what I came home to. So my boys, you could see them in the dirt,
Nice.
having a heyday, and I say
That's
free range
awesome.
kiddos. I call them the raccoons. They're just out there literally just living their best life, digging, playing, doing whatever. And I get a little bit upset and frustrated because they'll take some of my tools and they'll go out there. And I got a phone call from, they don't have, we have one phone at home that they can use, but there's no like smartphones or anything like that. And then we try to limit that screen time. And we have a TV, but it's like literally on maybe once every 2 months. And we might be watching Tuttle Twins or something like that. But they'll take my tools, and I got a call like, Dad, hey, where are your drill bits at? I'm like, what? Like, what do you do with the drill? Like, we're building something. I'm like, you put my drills back. Like, you're not allowed to be used. Yes, for CPS listening, we do watch and supervise these children. Yes, but we're out there, and these kids are, they're just living their best life. But that is awesome. What it's about. It's free range kiddos, and they're just vibrant. They're living what they're out there supposed to be doing, what they're supposed to be doing. But I think the AI world that's coming our way is going to disrupt the world that we know. I mean, it is a concern. So we need to be talking about it. And I don't care, I just want to just talk about these things as they come, because it's going to disrupt a lot of markets. And I heard that 60 to 70% of the white collar jobs are going to be eliminated due to AI. And not only that, it's going to dumb us down. And AI's got perfect memory. It doesn't forget. And I don't care what anybody says. They are storing that data. Everything you put into ChatGPT, they are storing it. Why? Because it's building their system. It's remembering. It's learning from us. And I heard something about like how OpenAI or the engineers tried to shut it down last year and they couldn't. I don't know if they had a term for it, or sentient, or whatever that word means. Like, it's smarter than the human brain now. I mean, it surpassed what the human mind can do. And that's concerning.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a place devoted to renewal and deep-rooted well-being. Ezra Healing supports individuals and families in soothing the nervous system, releasing accumulated stress and trauma, and restoring the body's God-given ability to repair and thrive. Their method is gentle, discerning, and grounded in honoring how the body was created to function. With steady guidance, thoughtful education, and practical resources, they come alongside each person to foster safety, resilience, and whole person healing. If you're seeking a space to breathe, rebalance, and truly heal, Ezra Healing offers a powerful path forward. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
When people really believe that this AI is superior, like a lowercase g, God, I think it's going to be.
Definitely think that's what these technocrats are after, is trying to create, to become God, but not in the sense of what you were talking about earlier and sort of your connection to the creator, but basically they think they can create something that will be a God and then can, rule over us, benevolently or whatever, or maybe malevolently, whatever they have in mind. But absolutely. I mean, the concerns about what we were talking about earlier about the data centers, the concerns about the loss of jobs, these are all real things. And it seems like some people are determined to bring every sci-fi movie we've ever seen to life.
Dude, right. I think The Terminator was a documentary, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and it sucks because they're all my favorite movies. I do love the sci-fi movies. I just don't want them to come to life. Right? It's one thing to watch them as some fun entertainment, and then it's another scary thing to turn on your social media feed and to see, okay, well, these people are actually doing these steps. I mean, even just, I'll kind of make it a little bit more real for those listening. Just today, as we're recording this, Donald Trump has released his new national policy framework on AI, and there's several statements in there that make it clear. Of course, they always frame this as we're trying to look out for the children. We need to protect the children. But they're also already talking about, in order to access AI, we need to have some sort of age verification. And this is one of the next steps in the direction of having an internet ID, where people would need some form of ID, which of course many of us believe will be a digital ID to access the internet. And at the same time, Senator Marsha Blackburn, she just introduced a new bill which would essentially do the same thing. So on one hand, you have the White House through Trump putting out a policy framework saying, hey, we need all these safeguards in place. And again, they frame it as somebody think about the children, protect the children. Because of course, there's all sorts of nasty stuff out there we do realistically want to protect the kids from, but they always use that as a framework in order to push their totalitarian agendas. And so The White House announces that. You got a senator already introducing it's like a 300-page bill. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in there. I'm sure it's not all that great, but we know for sure in there she's talking about age verification, some sort of digital ID, or showing your face, or some sort of verification in order to prove who you are. And they claim that this is going to keep the kids safe from AI and it affecting them. And I think that we don't have to think real hard to know that they're not thinking in the best interest of the children. This is just all about control, being able to track everything that we do everywhere we go, both in person, but also our digital footprint, being able to track and trace that. And you know that well as having been part of the disinformation dozen, where that leads. It leads to being able to debank people. It leads to being able to blacklist people. It leads to being able to take people off that. And that is it's a dangerous step. But what you're talking about, what you're doing with your family, it's really awesome, man. Because I mean that's the direction I'm moving as well. I mean, this is one of the reasons I moved to Mexico in March 2020. My lady Miriam, she's first generation born in the U.S. Her family's from Mexico, so we'd been visiting Mexico for years before COVID, and we kind of thought, one day maybe we'll get a place out here. And when February 2020 came around, I was kind of keeping track of this weird thing going on in China and telling her like something doesn't seem right about this. And then come March that year, when Trump started talking about restricting interstate travel and they were starting to track license plates leaving Rhode Island, leaving New York, we just loaded up her vehicle. I said, let's go visit your grandpa in Mexico. That I just think we'll be, safer there. And for us, it was the right move. Mexico ended up being one of the only, I think one, if not the only, one of the only countries that never had a vaccine requirement. They never had any quarantine requirements. Things were relatively open. And so a lot of Canadians, Americans, and Europeans who could get out came to Mexico, some temporarily and some stayed like we did. And we ended up finding a beautiful 23-acre piece of land out in the mountains, about an hour and a half outside the city from where I'm at now. We've got hundreds of avocado trees and bananas and limes and pears and pomegranate. We got a little lake, a little stream, and we're just starting to build our homes this year. Like, this to me is what real freedom is about. And I think that, getting out of those big cities as much as possible, this is really the solution that I promote. I call it exit and build, exiting from these systems that we know are not going to lead to long-term freedom and prosperity, and then building that which we want to actually see in the world. And, part of that is physical. Sometimes that might mean leaving a physical location, getting out of the big city, going to the countryside, but also opting out of the systems that we don't want to support, whether that's facial recognition, digital IDs, et cetera, et cetera. This is what my whole life is dedicated to. And I've learned, over the years that it's best not to just speak, but to lead by example. And so, everything that I write about and talk about are things that I'm doing in my own life, so outside of my journalism, I'm committed to permaculture and growing food. And we've got a community so far of about 6 households, multi-generational, bilingual community. And we're aiming for about 8 to 10 families that we're hoping to have complete by the end of this year. And we're getting ready to start working with some hempcrete and doing some bioconstruction and just trying to focus on it. Because I personally don't think that what is happening is, not to say that we shouldn't try to prevent it or slow it down or whatever, but I'm not too optimistic that it can be stopped. And I think, for me, the path is more about what can we actually do to build systems that we want to see instead of trying to reform these broken systems.
Amen. So in other words, you got room for me and my wife and 5 kids.
We definitely hope to, and that's what we're aiming for. I mean, we've got the land now, and we've, just thankfully we were able to pay it off last year without any banks involved. So we own it outright. We've got the deed, the title to the land, and there's a few small structures. We got a donkey. We've got, some things going on like that, but we're just kind of in the early stages really of that transition of shifting from where we are now. We have a nice place, on the edge of town, which is it's comfortable, and I'm grateful for it. But definitely with everything we're facing, we want to be able to. And again, when we do start having kids, I want to see my children doing what your boys were just doing there. I want them to have that freedom. And I feel like, on a personal level, I've never been in a better place than I am now. I'm not 20 years old and addicted to drugs. I'm not 30 and still trying to figure things out. I'm not a broke, starving activist. I'm at the point now where I've, got somebody that I love and care about. We've got land. We're building with people who are like-minded and who have the same values and principles. And, it's like, if it was going to happen, this would be the time to do it.
Amen. Well, so much to be thankful for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're in a good spot. But I would absolutely love to have, like a commune of like-minded people, and I feel like back in the day, people used to do that more often. Like families would be on the same ground. They'd always work together. They'd farm together. And, and I foresee, massive food shortages coming. I see massive disruption in our farming industry. Look at the amount of farmers that we've lost. We're continuing to lose in this country. I mean, it's just like, we're just so dumb that we just don't even realize it. Like, people wake up, we're heading for a cliff and people don't even see it, So when I say, hey, me and my wife and kids are going to join you in Mexico, part of me is like, we should do something like that, because, then might have people say I might not be able to speak on the American topics because I'm living in Mexico.
I do think community is a big part of it. I mean, like I'm not a trust fund kid. I don't have just unlimited wealth. So for me, part of it was also just practical. Like, okay, we need to work with other people if we're going to be able to do the vision that we have. I could go get myself just a little quarter acre or an acre and try to do it myself. But I do believe community really is key in being able to accomplish what we want to do. And of course, like what we want to do, our community is called the Conscious Agora Eco Village. If anybody's curious, they can go to theconsciousagora.com. There's a little bit of info there.
Conscious what?
The Conscious Agora, which is, the Greek word for the marketplace, for the place where people come together to discuss ideas and exchange goods. And it's kind of the way that we imagine it to be, because we want it to be a place that we live, like a village that we live, but also we're going to build an education center there where we can teach some of these skills, teach people how to build with natural materials, teach people how to, talk about the philosophy of liberty and how to think about these ideas, and as well as kind of a healing center as well. So we've got some big plans, and right now we're focused on just getting our homes established. And I definitely know that it's, for us at least, like community is an absolutely vital part of that. So we have these 23 acres. Everybody has their own quarter acre that they own. You do what you want on there, build a house that you want that works for your family. But then we all have common access to all the fruit trees, to the waterways, to everything else. And we want this to be kind of a model that once we really establish it, that we can share, like, hey, here's the steps we took. Here's the things we did. Whether you want to live in Mexico or wherever else, here's things that you could try to sort of build something similar that aligns with your values. Because it's, my message isn't we all need to come to Mexico and that's going to solve all our problems. Wherever, appeals to you, whether that means, again, in the US, out of a big city to somewhere in the countryside. A lot of people went from California to Texas, or, things like that, or even just wherever you were born and raised. The point is, if we plant our roots and start building the world that we want to see, and stop relying on false saviors to do it for us, and each of us do that everywhere instead of trying to run to one location or something like that, I think then the ideas of liberty and freedom can and will survive whatever we're facing. But if we keep thinking that voting is going to solve all of our problems, and I kind of see that as like outsourcing your sovereignty. It's just you're giving it away to somebody else. So I think that for me, the answer is reclaiming that sovereignty, putting our hands back in the soil, and working on all the different things that we as a species need to take on. And the more we do it, I think I can see, for example, just in my own work, how the steps that I've taken over the last 5 years, which has been a process of finding the right people, finding the land, of course, establishing what are our principles that we're trying to build around, and how do people join the group? How do people leave? What is our conflict resolution process? There's a lot of human work to do here. But I get the emails and the messages of people telling me that how that's inspired them in their own way, not necessarily to come to Mexico, but hey, I started growing a garden in my backyard. I started doing this. And that's really what I'm focused on, is like, how can we each use our own voices, our own sphere of influence, whether that's big or small, whether that's just your local friends and family or millions of people on the internet, and use that in a positive way to, yes, empower people. I try to use my journalism to educate people. Here's all the scary things going on, but then also bring them to the solutions. And hey, here's some ideas that you could do about it. Here's some things you could do for yourself. Yeah. And I think that's really the key right now for me.
Dude, that's great. I love that. Shout out to Joel Salatin. You can farm if you're in that situation. If you only have a backyard, you can go read that book. You can farm. You'll be inspired. Even if you have a backyard, front yard, doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Just get out there, get your hands in the soil. Another great book I recommend is Pigness of Pigs. I think it's The Marvelous Pigness of Pigs by Joel, but huge fan of Joel Salatin. But what you're doing, Derrick, is awesome. You're just getting after it. You're just doing it. More people need to be like that. It's very inspiring to me just to keep doing that. And really, man alive, so many people talk of like, oh, that'd be cool to do that, but you're like legit doing it. And it's really, really inspiring. And might have to come down and visit,
Please do. I would love, Ben, for you to come down, bring your family. So where I live in central Mexico is also where we host the People's Reset every January. And we launched this in the middle of COVID. It was originally called the Greater Reset. We had RFK speak years ago, Del Bigtree, a lot of people that have come down and been involved. And the whole idea was originally like, okay, they've got their Great Reset. Well, we're the Greater Reset. And eventually we rebranded as the People's Reset. And so it's focused on
like
us.
The best reset. Yeah.
And I mean, the idea is that when they're meeting in Davos for 5 days in January, we meet for 5 days to talk about bottom-up, grassroots, people-powered solutions. We have a day all about mental, physical, spiritual health. We have a day about permaculture and growing your own food, about building parallel systems, homeschooling, decentralized privacy-based technology. And it's been honestly a big blessing to be one of the organizers. It's me and Miriam. It's our thing we do. We get about 300 or 400 people come from about a dozen countries. We stream it free for the internet for all around the world. We get about 20 countries tuned in. And it's just 5 days of activation, talking about solutions. What can we actually do for ourselves? How can we empower each other? How can we motivate each other? And I'd love to have you come down and be a speaker next year.
Dude, yeah, count me in. I eat a lot of avocados, so.
I got plenty. I've got 2 giant sacks of avocados that we just harvested the other day that are ripening right now. So you'll have plenty when you get here.
Yes. Okay. And I would love that. Yes. Well, Derrick, I loved our conversation today. I might have to have you back on for a part 2, because obviously I think I try to have these conversations just organic and free flowing. I feel like the conversations go where they flow, and I just try not to interfere with that. So I think we can have you back on for a part 2. I really enjoyed our conversation. Really want to just pick your brain though, because I do think you bring a lot of wisdom in the areas of these topics, and you have a good perspective on things. And I really want to just keep that conversation going. So, and again, even love to pick your brain on how you got into the Ron Paul side of things. But again, Ron Paul really shone a light on things for both of us, and I think that's really cool. But can you put a plug in, Derrick? I'll give you the last word here, just for a word of encouragement for the days ahead, where people can find you and on your socials too. So put a plug in for that.
I really do appreciate you inviting me, and I'd love to come back anytime and continue the dialogue. Yeah, I mean, I really just want to reiterate what I was saying a moment ago. For everybody who may be hearing this, who is watching the news and the social media feeds, or even the stuff that Ben or I share, which is important, and you feel overwhelmed by it, just to recognize that in whatever way you can, there are solutions, there are things you can do for yourself. I do think that this is a time for all of us to rise to the occasion. I believe that the Creator, whether you believe that's Christ or the Creator of the universe, whatever name you want to give it, I believe the Creator wants us to rise to the occasion right now, that this is the moment humanity was put here for, to rise and to stand against evil, and to also be about what we want to see in the world. And so I just want to encourage everybody to put as much energy as you put into keeping up with what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein and all the wild stuff in the world, to put that same amount of energy, if not more, hopefully more, into what you want to see in the world with your family, your friends, and your circles. And if you would like to learn more about my work, my main website is theconsciousresistance.com. That's where my books, documentaries, podcasts are. If you're curious about my 17-part documentary series, The Pyramid of Power, the website is thepyramidofpower.net, and thepeoplesreset.org if you want to learn more about our event we have here in Mexico. And the last thing I'll mention is, if you want to learn more about my personal story, I just released my memoir about my story of overcoming addiction and going to prison and turning my life around. It's called A Man of My Word: How I Overcame Addiction, Depression, and Mental and Physical Prisons. And you can find that at amanofmyword.com. So thank you for having me on, brother.
Dude, I thought I had a lot going on, man. Derrick, thanks again, brother. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, please go support Derrick. We'll put the links to all of his stuff in the podcast, but please go support him. Go follow him on socials. And please share this podcast far and wide. And those that are donating this podcast, supporting this podcast, thank you so much. We love you. Life is not what you gather, it's what you scatter. And we are there exposing the darkness and shining light on the world. We're here to be a light in the darkness. So go share this podcast. And thanks for supporting. We love you guys. We appreciate you guys. And God bless.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right.
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?